Mitch, I know we're looking for a working title, but we cannot name the podcast The Business of Theater. You got trouble.
Well, we got trouble. How about that version of it?
Yeah.
And we
Well,
don't.
we got trouble.
We
And
ain't
I'm
got
pretty
trouble.
sure we tried to push this working title in a previous season,
Yeah.
but there always seems to be there's always concern in our business and it just comes up as if it's brand new. And so we end up having to read articles to look at how nothing has changed, you
The
know?
the every time they say that theater is dying or the death of Broadway, I mean, why do we even bother? It's not true. It's not going to be true. It's, I guess, a good conversation starter. Here we are talking about it, right? The New York
Yeah.
Times deciding that musical theater is in trouble. Gee whiz, how many
Yeah.
musicals have opened? How many musicals are revived? The West End is in better shape than Broadway. What? It's the 1 year. And then we went through that period of time where all the musicals going to Broadway came from the West End. And at that time, they said, gee, will there ever be an American musical? I mean, someone needs to invent things to write about.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
okay, we can move on from that topic. No, I'm just,
Yeah. Everyone, this is The Business of Theater, a working title. I'm Darnelle Radford,
I'm Mitch Weiss.
and let's get down to business. Yeah. So as September came to an end, we started seeing a bunch of things that are kind of similar. I mean, we're still kind of in the beginning of the theater season. It tends to start in September. In Philadelphia, we just wrapped up the 2025 Philly Fringe Festival. And even though we love the Fringe Festival, it tends to suck all the air out of the room. And every theater must wait until the festival closes. But it's a celebration and sort of a promotion of some, here's an overabundance of art in your face to kind of get you going for the
Well,
rest of
and
the season.
let me mention, because I don't know that Philly is the same, but certainly in New York, the reason that you would have a fringe in September is because that's when the audiences aren't going to the big
Huh.
commercial hits on Broadway.
Yeah.
And so, since you want to encourage people to see theater, but you don't want to open your show during a period where the audience is just getting back to school and to work after the summer, you
Mm.
don't open shows. So now you have a fringe.
Well, I have interviewed the original producing director, Nick Studio, but I don't think I even asked why September. But I would imagine it's, taking the temperature of other festivals throughout the year because, Edinburgh, the biggest fringe festival, is in August. And so it would make sense to compete with Edinburgh. Not that it is a competition. It is interesting because it works for Philadelphia-based artists or artists coming to Philly because they can go to Edinburgh in August, and then, they are more than ready for participation in the Fringe in September. But I do remember because I haven't just worked in theater, I also worked in cultural institutions. I worked in museums over the years, and I remember when I worked at the Franklin Institute here in Philadelphia a while back, they had a promotion in September called Seniors in September because it was a time when it was slower. In September, like there was schools starting, like you said, and it's not likely that a school is going to take a field trip that early. And then whatever big push they had as a summer blockbuster had just sort of ended. And it was a time when the museum is just the museum. It's getting ready for its next special exhibit, which isn't coming until later in the fall or so.
And here in New York, we just had 2-for-1
Mhm.
Broadway week,
Yeah.
right? I mean, everything's about a promotion because the audiences are at its smallest level
Yeah.
week by week, so they come up with promotions. The same
But I
is
also
true
think
same is true in January. January is
yeah,
the other bad month.
yeah, good point. But I also think it's because of summer, everyone's on vacation or trying to get out of town in the summer, and so, in the region, getting out of town is to go to New York.
Mhm.
But, after the summer, as the summer ends, everybody's ready to kind of go back home and just sort of gather themselves. And so it is a slow period because, arguably arguably we've been running, all summer
And
in
people,
some way.
we used to have a thing called summer stock, where theater companies only ran during the summer. I know I worked at Barrington Stage up in Massachusetts, and for the first year I was there, the summer was the only time we really existed because that's when all the city folk would go up to the Berkshires to experience their summer homes with culture. The Williamsburg Festival is up there. A number of dance companies are up there, and Shakespeare and Company is up there. And so it becomes a destination. And then they first come back, and you know what? They've had enough culture. So September kind of sits on its butt.
Stop shoving your culture in my face. I'm full, thank you. I've had enough. Well, what really sparked our working title was an article I read a few days ago in the New York Times. It was titled "The Broadway Musical is in Trouble." It was written by Michael Paulson, and at the top of it, it says none of the 18 commercial musicals that opened on Broadway last season have made a profit yet, and some still could, but several have been spectacular flameouts.
So the big question that I would pose to him and really annoyed me. This is one of those articles that you just want to walk up to the writer and slap him. Have you not been around? 80% of all Broadway shows do not make a profit. In fact, they lose 100% of their money. And the other 20% is divided between shows that barely break even and may have a future in regional theater after that. And then the shows that turn into Hamilton, Wicked, Chorus Line, and become blockbusters. That's the kind of the 1 out of 10 that hits it. That has not changed since I was a little baby boy. And I don't know why this guy doesn't understand that. So this is just another season with the same stuff.
Well, let me ask you this, in your opinion, is Broadway just an expensive advertisement for a regional circuit?
No. Good question, by the way. It's a very
Yeah.
good. The
Or
regions,
could it be? Like, I'm assuming there's multiple ways for a producer on Broadway to look at this as a success. If it may not make all of its money back on Broadway, but if it garners a lot of acclaim and popularity, that perhaps, once it's published, that a lot of people want to produce it. And it'll be something that may go on much longer than its run on
there
Broadway.
are many shows, things that people would consider to be hits. I'm trying to come up with the one best example. They were popular for a while on Broadway, but for the most part did not make money. But because of the thing called subsidiary rights, the investors ended up making a profit because in the future years afterward, regional theaters, high schools, senior centers, community centers, colleges, they all wanted to do that show and they paid royalties for it. Sometimes it got turned into a movie. I mean, Mamma Mia was a hit on Broadway, but a moderate hit on Broadway. It ended up being the highest grossing movie musical at the time that it came out. It broke all records. And somehow a show that did not garner great reviews, did not have the longest run on Broadway, still ended up making a fortune for its investors because the subsidiary rights, which are the money that comes in after Broadway, started building and building and building. So there's plenty of ways to make your money, which is why you want an experienced producer who has an experienced general manager so they don't just lose their shirts. There are ways to continue to make money.
So let me ask this. So, with that thought in mind, would an investor be more in favor of the expense of a pro shot
Hmm. Maybe.
if they're thinking like perhaps there's an opportunity on after Broadway.
I've known shows that and investors that have done that. You're giving investors too much credit.
I know they put money in hoping that it grows.
No, they put money in, and I'm being very dead serious for the moment. Not all, okay, we always have to play that line. Not all fit into this category, but a lot of the major investors or the repeat investors want to impress their nephew that they can take them to opening night and introduce them to a star. And that's it. They had so much extra money, and they already have money coming in the stock market, and they just say, "This is fun. I fell in love with theater in high school, but I'm not the actor. I'm not the
Mm.
musician. This is a way I can say I won a Tony Award, even though I did absolutely nothing but give them my money." And there are shows that have lost money that have won the Tony Award. They have a Tony Award. By the way, the Tonys give out a very small number of Tonys to the producers if they win Best Player Musical. The other investors are allowed to buy a Tony Award if their show has won. So again, this is about, and don't get me wrong, I love these investors. We need their money. We need their support. I think they are true creative lovers, but they really have no clue of what they're investing in. And I made a big generality that may lose me my investors.
A quick search online says that the last reported cost of that Tony Award is $2,500.
There you go. Well, the seats cost almost $1,000 per person to be in the audience if you are a nominee. So you don't even get to sit there for free if you've been nominated. It's a very sad situation, and
Business,
yet
yeah.
it's tradition and it's what we do. It's also the reason why a lot of these shows are not doing well. If they are just hanging on and then they have to pay all the expenses because they were nominated for a Tony Award, right? How many people are going to say, our show got 2 nominations, we're not going. We're not going to participate. We're not
Yeah.
going to send our actors to the show to act on stage or host or whatever. You're not going to get that said by any producer. Well,
Well,
I'm being so negative. Can I
no,
now
it's
say,
we're engaging in this foundation that was laid by this article.
yep,
We're engaging in it. I also want to ask, um, when you see an article like this, right? Do the do the owners of the Broadway houses think anything about this? Like, what are their thoughts? Because they're contributing to the high cost of producing these shows
they are most
by,
of the reason for the high
yeah,
costs. I do.
I'm being generous, but yeah.
I do want to go back a step. I had a wonderful conversation with an electrician on a chorus line. And chorus line's not an expensive show, relatively. But at that time, there were a lot of articles in the New York Times claiming that the high cost of theater tickets had more to do with stagehands and musicians and the cost of their union salaries. And the electrician came up to me. He was very upset. He said, someone's got to talk back to these people. My salary has barely gone up except for cost of living. I have a small home upstate New York where I barely get to see my family because I spend so much time in the city working. He said, it's not that my salary is too high. It's the fact that a producer designs a show so that instead of only 3 electricians working on it, there is no way to do the show unless we have 6 electricians because the director has built-in cues. You cannot have one person handling all of those lighting cues at the same moment. You need a second person or a third person, and that adds to the cost. Same thing happens with wardrobe. You add so many costume changes. You can only help an actor, one person at a time. or five
Mhm.
people at a time. There are limits. So he said, so if you design a show, so you only need two electricians, no one in my union is going to tell you you can't do it. But if you design a show that requires 12 because you designed it that way, we'll take the jobs.
Yeah.
So the cost is how many people you are hiring because you created a production that requires that many people. And he was so adamant. And this was, of course, we're talking 1980s. It hasn't changed. You look at what has happened on Broadway and the set designs, which are brilliant, and the cabaret, which just closed. They reinvented the whole theater.
Yeah.
Well, what if they had just put the show on a stage that already existed?
Yeah.
Right?
So that's always something I think about, they have to pay to restore the theater to the
Hmm.
state that it was when they got it. And so many productions will, gut the seats and then pay to store them and bring in their own seats. But if they didn't do that, is there more of a liability because they might actually damage the existing seats that are there?
No, if you're changing the theater, there are costs to changing the theater. It may actually take more than 200 stagehands to take that theater apart in the period of time that the producer and the theater owners have set aside to do that change. And then,
Yeah.
of course, it has to be restored in as short a period of time as possible. So you hire more people. So you have 200 people at the beginning. Actually, most load-ins on Broadway require up to 200 people on it anyway, because they have, what, 4 weeks or less to bring an entire show onto that stage with the entire set, costumes, and lights, and everyone's working at the same time. And then, of course, once the show starts, the number of people reduces to what you need to be your running crew. That's where the real costs are. Have you created a show that cannot be run by a bare minimum number of people? That means every week your show now may cost up to $1 million a week. That means you have to take in $1 million at the box office just to break even. That's why these shows are not breaking even, why they're not turning a profit. So the question would be from an investor to the producer, how much is the operating budget? How much will it cost to run this week by week? And why is it so expensive? You look at Hamilton, they weren't even trying to keep their costs down, and their costs are much lower than a Wicked. Wicked cost a fortune. Lion King cost an absolute fortune. But they take in a lot of money. They also charge a lot at the box office.
Yeah.
Right. So the trick is, and you know this, I'm working on a potential off-Broadway show, commercial, and my entire aim is to make sure the weekly expenses are as low as possible so I can thank my investors by returning a profit as soon as possible. And I don't know too many of these big musicals that were thinking that way.
Yeah. It's so interesting because they do have time to think about all that. And they're just like, whatever, they'll pay $200 a ticket, you know? It's like they're gonna have to try to recoup this, but they're just saying, I want, and I won't accept anything less, to get what they want on
Well,
stage.
you have a creative decision also. You have a writer and a designer and a director who come in with an idea and they just say, "You know what? This time, in order to make it a little more special, this is what we'd like to happen." A la Andrew Lloyd Webber having a helicopter arrive on stage during Miss Saigon. Now it's not a
Yeah.
real helicopter. It looks like a helicopter. It sounds like a helicopter. It still costs money, right? I don't know that that helped the show at all, but it did get a publicity.
Yeah.
So how do you balance that? I don't know. It's someone comes in, the Beckett's the show with Keanu Reeves that just opened. Yeah. Waiting for
Waiting for
Godot.
Godot.
Waiting for Godot. The reviews just came out today, mixed, but the set is fascinates everybody. They are all talking about the set. It's a very different concept. I don't think
Mhm.
it's expensive. I haven't seen the show, but it's a different concept. So you can have a very creative idea that isn't expensive and a very creative idea that is expensive. Each producer and director have to have that discussion, right? The investors often want to see the helicopter. So sometimes you can argue with them that, well, if we left the helicopter out, I will tell you, for example, Sunday in the Park with George, there's in Act Two, they have a laser show because
Mhm.
the artist in the second act,
Mhm.
his new vision is I'm working with lasers. So at one point, they actually had something flying across the audience that was lasers to represent this. And I happen to know it cost $300,000 to do that special effect.
Wow.
When the show closed, it lost exactly $300,000.
Wow.
And I'm telling this because
Yeah.
I know this from firsthand. My numbers may be off by 1,000 here or there, right?
So was it not in the budget?
Yeah, it was, but they never made enough money to break even. Sunday in the Park
Ah,
with George, there's a good example. In its original run, did not make a profit, but subsequently, it has made a
yeah.
lot of money
A
all around
darling,
the
yeah.
world, right?
Yeah.
And it still doesn't even have a movie. So if it ever
Wow.
gets a movie, that would be even more money in the pockets. But it has done very well. I think the same thing happened with Little Night Music, certainly with Follies. Follies lost a lot of money, and it was a critical darling. Everyone loved it. And it has had like 4 revivals, and it's all around the world. And they're now supposedly making a movie. The original, I don't know this personally, but I would imagine that the original investors have finally gotten their money back. And of course, that was 1971. Look how long it may have taken for them to get their money back. It may have come earlier because it did become a bigger hit after it closed, you know. And the show was selling out; it was doing very well. It just was too expensive. They couldn't break even. They had so many stars. They had gigantic costumes that cost a fortune. I've seen it 3 times in the original run. There's nothing. No revival has come close to what that show looked like. You can, and it was probably the most expensive show at its time. And it was gorgeous. So the question is, was Hal Prince wrong to spend that money? Maybe that's the reason why in its afterlife it's such a big hit. Hard to know. What if the costumes had been less expensive?
Well, yeah, and then when you get into it, like, if you've read, uh, The Business of Broadway,
By Mitch
uh
Weiss and Perry Gaffney.
yes. You start to understand the nuance and the importance of all these areas of theater production. Um, to understand why it costs so much to craft a costume because it needs to last, but it also needs to serve. It needs to be able to it needs to be able to look authentic, but also it needs to be able to disappear in seconds, for transitions and whatnot. And I think it's also so interesting that people still don't understand why everything costs so much. It's not just the rent of a facility, you know, um, and all this time costs as well,
Mhm.
to get everybody on the same page about, what started out as a blueprint, is now coming to life. And I always feel like that story needs to be told in repetition. Like you
To
have to
whom, though? And that's bottom line is who are we battling? It seems
and
to me we're battling people who aren't interested in the arts in the first place. The people who are willing to listen.
yeah.
And that's why there are angels everywhere. It may not be everyone we want. It may not be at every moment. It may not be for every institution. but it's when we look to the government or even to corporate foundations, they're not really interested in our what our problems are. They just say we're supposed to do something and this is what we're willing to do whether you like it or not.
Yeah. Well, there are things that just make you appreciate things a lot more. Like last year, the National Geographic channel did a special. I think it was paid, like a paid special for Epcot Center
Hmm.
at Disney World, and it was about sort of the changes that are being made for this new transformation. And you can find it on YouTube. I watched it, but it was like if you watch one of those things, you do understand all that goes into things. Like there's a fireworks display every night. Every night. Every night. It runs like a production. It has a stage manager, it has stage hands, everything. And it's just one of the things that Epcot Center offers you in your experience. And if you don't understand, if you don't have any kind of way to understand the behind the scenes of all that, you probably just don't appreciate it at all. You're just like, "Oh, let's watch the fireworks," and you're being distracted by your children and family. You're trying to figure out like, "Oh, there's a time, like, if you're taking the monorail back, like, this certain time you gotta get on," and everything. You might be thinking about all those things. How are we gonna get back to our hotel, you know, with this thing,
But it's
happening?
also true with Hallmark card stores, and it's true with a Walmart distribution center. How these things work, I think for most of humanity, our frustrations are when we don't understand how things work. Therefore, we are disappointed, we're frustrated by whatever didn't work the way we thought it should. For the
Yeah.
most part, you go to Epcot and there's that fireworks display. You just want the magic. You're not
Mhm.
really worried about how it
Well,
happened,
yeah.
right?
I mean, I also believe that that's part of their promotion. Like, don't worry about the nuts and bolts. Here's the magic, but they still
And
produce
isn't that
the nuts and
theater?
bolts.
But that's theater also. We want them to come in and forget that there are 200 people working all week long to make that
Yeah.
one performance special for you,
Mhm.
right? And that's wonderful, except that everything costs money.
Well, I also don't mean that they need to watch a documentary before they enter Epcot Center. I just mean, like, there's value in it existing if you're planning your trip, We're planning a trip to Las Vegas to see The Wizard of Oz at the Sphere,
Mhm.
right? And so since we had planned it, we've stumbled upon, reviews, feedback, behind the scenes of the Sphere, the building of the Sphere, and other shows that are in it, like people's responses and everything. It's not going to change whether we're going there or not, but we have a better understanding of the experience we're about to, uh, you know, endure.
It would be wonderful if people were interested.
I know this is the hardest part. It's the people on the inside who are doing the work who really value the work going into it. Everyone else just wants to be entertained.
It's true fashion industry. I'll be honest with you, and I am not a fashion plate. I look at The Devil Wears Prada, and I see complete stupidity in the seriousness with which they take their business. And yet Meryl Streep's role explains how it affects my everyday life. And in just her little monologue where she's explaining, "You don't understand, denim, the jeans you're wearing today came from the fact that 3 years prior to that, some really expensive designer or very famous designer came up with a particular color that affected eventually how it got ripped off and ended up in Walmart so that you could wear that color that you think is blue, but it's not blue. It's some, she goes into these details.
Yeah.
That is worth knowing. as opposed to me just saying, "Oh, please give me a break. Nothing is worth $1,000 to put on your body to wear." Right?
Yeah.
That's my guts, and I think that is most of where our educational system may fail. National Geographic, to see what new animals they have found at the bottom of the ocean. That should, to me, that's fascinating.
I knew it. You said it's not just blue, and I was gonna say it's cerulean.
Thank you. Thank you.
I wasn't sure. I had to do a
I
quick
couldn't
look.
remember. I couldn't
Oh,
remember.
I love those moments.
Yeah.
My own validation there.
But yeah, but
Yes.
these things, every time I learn something like this, it's often by accident. Here I am watching a movie, and now I'm learning something.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
again, one of the powers, in my less than humble opinion, of why theater is so important, and theater in movies, all the different variations of it. There's a great deal of knowledge within the storyline,
Mhm.
right? Fascinated. How the hell does National Geographic get those shots of animals that have never been seen before in human existence? Right? There are documentaries that'll help you understand how they did it,
Yeah.
but then you're not really understanding the fact that it was an entire year of someone's life to get 30 seconds of an animal that we didn't know existed, right? And what kind of cameras? Well, wait a minute. Did they use an iPhone? Is that enough? No, they use this very expensive camera. Why? Why is that the camera you have to use? Why?
Because they had to get the
Yeah,
shots
but couldn't they have?
from so far away.
Well, and you can,
They have to be far away enough for them to not be sensed,
if they were
and
even
also
there, if they were
for them
even
to just
there.
exist as they normally
Yeah.
do. Yeah, it's so interesting. I've learned more about that because of photography and, like, the value of each lens, like, why you need certain lenses for certain shots that you
Another
wanna
art
take.
form, another great
Mhm,
art form. One of the artists that I work with who is a photographer, Richard Diegues, who goes, I guess I should use his professional name, Ziamaro.
mhm,
He's, things that I would say, I'm walking down the street in New York and take a photo, it looks interesting, and I'm done. He can take that photo and turn it into a complete art piece using different cameras, different lenses, different developing mechanisms that I would never even know about. It's an art form, and I guess if you even, fix car engines, it's an art form to understand things, especially nowadays, how they put a car together that isn't anything like the cars we had 30 years ago.
mhm.
So
Yeah, and,
you got to
there's
respect them all. But who are these people who don't respect any of this? That's what I'm trying to figure out.
that's what's so interesting. It's like, where are you trying to go so quickly that you don't have time to understand how much went into what you just consumed?
You know what? You have a family, you're barely making enough to pay for the food in your house. You are working two jobs, three jobs.
I mean, that was rhetorical.
I know,
And
I
also,
understand, but
I also understand that, yeah, it is somewhat of a luxury to
mm,
be able to experience art. There's people who are probably watching everybody run in and out of these theaters. I saw 3 or 4 shows today, you know? It's like there is some kind of privilege to that, but you gotta get into it to really understand, "Oh, perhaps these were all pay what you decides, and perhaps I am an artist, so I get an artist discount, or perhaps I have friends in these shows, so I got a comp," or something. You don't know right away, but you just this is why I just feel like we should all be life learners because we don't just know everything, you know? We shouldn't just wanna stop at what we already know
there's your subtitle for the business of theater. We just don't all know, and the other,
because we just don't all
we
know.
just don't all know everything.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, I guess I don't know when. I'm sure there was a time where I was just impatient, about everything,
Last week,
but probably. But I think through doing interviews on the podcast network over these years, I have become more curious than impatient. You know, I never sat with an artist going like, I would always make a joke about, "Okay, who dies in the end?" Like,
Mhm.
it's like because you think if you know that, then you're not gonna wanna see this, but we are the conversations are, in a way, trying to validate or even, to an extent, condition you to go on the ride. To
Yeah.
take the journey and not to just get the sound bites so you can say, "Oh, it's a show about this, this, and that. I didn't go, but I got the gist." Like, okay, and how does the gist value you? Like, what value did you get from the gist? It's sort of like, in school, the kids who use Cliff's Notes, or
Yeah.
which became Spark Notes after a while. Like, how did you get value out of this when they just gave you the gist?
Well, it's because we were, at least speaking for myself, it's not just a hypothetical question. I know the Cliff Notes said to me, I am assigned something that I don't particularly know why I'm
Mhm,
doing it. No one has explained it. No one has showed me the value. I don't know the value of just reading a 500-page book by
mhm.
itself. Therefore, this is enough for me to get past the test. And that was it. So, our educational system has been lacking in that way for forever, I guess. Doesn't mean look, you and I, how brilliant we are. Obviously, we made it through the system, but I would have hoped that I would have had the curiosity that you're talking about when I was much younger, and I didn't. I wish I had. Now, looking back, the amount of things I could have learned, the amount of things I could have understood, which is blessed. That's theater did that for me. What I couldn't get in school, I got by seeing shows.
Yeah.
And I really did. I can think back to even the lousy shows I saw when I was young. There was something in there that went, I have a new understanding of myself and life, even if it's a small difference, right? And I guess people get that when they read novels. I have friends who read 3 books a week, right? That's their version of this. So you go to 5 shows a week, right? Me too, if I can.
Yeah.
Anyway, all that, let's go back to the fact that the reason musicals are having trouble, and I think there is an answer, because this particular year, most of them spent too much money without developing the work in advance. There was less development and more production costs, which we know our friend Alan Harrison keeps arguing about. Spend the money on people, not on things, not on sets. That doesn't mean we don't want to have the joy of seeing a wonderful set do surprising things. Hamilton has 2 turntables. It's fun when they're dancing around the stage and the turntables are moving. That costs a lot of money. It's not as much as having a helicopter come into your theater, but it costs. And you have to have experts who know how to build that and make it run 7 days a week without fail. And it has to be kept up, which means now you have weekly costs. And that's just one little thing. All the costumes have to be kept up and washed carefully because they have to survive for all those actors week after week after week. There are costs. So where do you save the money? Well, Hamilton, A Chorus Line, sure saved a lot of money on their sets,
Mhm.
right? And that helped bring their costs down. So when you look at a Death Becomes Her or a hit like Wicked, that did not save money on their sets. Where's the argument there? Wicked, because it was such a big hit, could decided we can afford this. But had they been not that big a hit, they would have been one of those 18 shows that haven't broken even yet,
Yeah.
right? So you either have a monster hit or you can't afford what you got. And that's the answer to his question. Musicals are not in trouble. It's the same problem that's always existed. You either get a hit or you don't.
So Wicked in a meeting said, "It's time to trust our instincts, close our eyes, and leap."
God.
All right, before we get out of here, do you have one singular sensation?
Yes. I'm going to discuss or bring up a young actor who does not live in New York City, who has some ethnic challenges, meaning that he is not white, loves acting, has had some success, meaning people think he's a good actor and he's gotten jobs. And my singular sensation is knowing that he can't afford to live in New York still, even though he's been in Broadway shows. He has to go back and forth. That he has to have a second job to sustain himself in the meantime. He has such a positive attitude about how much he wants to do his profession, how much he believes he has a chance at making a living at this with no qualifications at all. And it's not naivete. It's just a gorgeous aura to be around. So that's my singular sensation.
Optimism.
Okay.
Yeah. I thought you were going to name names. Okay. My one singular sensation is
Again, easy for you to say.
it is a nasal spray that deals with allergies. And I feel like whenever a season officially changes over, my nose gets a tickle, my throat. I've been in many theaters where this is a problem. And without fluticasone, I won't give a brand name. I just can't function. I'm in the point where I'm at
uh,
taking, I'm, that's at the top of my day. I might even take an allergy pill later as well, but just to have armor because, it's much worse. It was much worse this year than it's ever been. And so I can't function without fluticasone.
so bottom line is drugs.
Drugs, yeah. Drugs are good when they make you feel better. That's funny because all drugs claim to do that.
That's right.
Yes. Anyway, enough of our shenanigans. That is The Business of Theater, a working title. I'm Darnell Radford,
I'm Mitch Weiss.
and we'll see you at the theater.
Bye bye.